Hello. So for this assignment, I chose the story Jack and the Beanstalk. Super excited. I loved hearing the story as a kid, and I know there's lots of different versions of it. And so the first version I'm going to tell the story of is Kate and the Beanstalk, and it's by Mary Pope Osborne. So in this story, instead of Jack being the main character, Kate's actually the main character. Kate loses or gets her magic beans the same way by trading her cow, and then her mother's very sad with her. She throws them out the window, the beanstalk grows, and Kate climbs up of it, only to discover a castle with a giant inside and a giantess. And the giantess cooks for the giant. And the giant comes downstairs, fee, fi, fo, fum. I smell the blood of an English woman instead of a man, which I thought was pretty funny as well. And so Kate helps the giantess. At the end of the story, Kate and the Beanstalk, Kate actually discovered that her father was killed by the giant, and that castle that was up in the clouds was her father's castle. So I thought that was a pretty fun way to twist the story around at the end. In the second story I read, the more traditional Jack and the Beanstalk by Richard Walker. Jack found the magic beans the same way, traded his cow in because him and his mother were very poor. His mother threw the beans out the window and the stalk started growing. Jack climbed up the beanstalk, and this time, instead of a giantess, Jack found a little old woman who would cook for the giant, and then he asked for the little old woman. He asked the woman to come inside and cook him something because he was starving. And then I forgot to mention that both of these stories included the golden goose, or the goose that could lay the golden eggs. And so the giant came back and ate his stew and said, "I smell a blood of an Englishman." And then he grabbed the golden goose. The golden goose laid an egg, and then just as Jack was about to go back down the beanstalk, the goose wanted to go with him, and Jack thought that was such a good idea because then he would be rich. And so he grabbed one of the bags of coins, of the gold coins that the giant had, and then the golden goose, and started going down the beanstalk. And then the little old lady wanted to go and be free from the giant, so she went with them. And as they were running away from the giant, Jack ended up pulling the beanstalk back and zinged him into the sky. And that's how Jack got rid of the giant. So the third book that I read was called Paco and the Giant Chili Plant. This book was such a fun read too. It started off the same way. Paco needed to sell his cow to help pay for food in his family's house. So Paco went and sold his cow for some chili seeds, and instead of his mother being mad and throwing them out the window, Paco actually planted them himself and waited for the chili plant to grow and grow and grow. The chili plant grew all the way above the clouds, and he saw this giant house, and he went into the house and he saw all this giant furniture. And then he was creeping around, and he saw the giant's feet. And little did he know there was a giant there. And the giant swooped him up and said, "I'm gonna eat you." And he said, "No, I have these these chilies for you to eat." And the giant squished them so hard that the juice squirted in his eyes, and he started crying and crying and crying. And as the giant was crying, the giant shrunk and shrunk and shrunk, all the way down to human size. And then the giant, now a human, remembered that Paco was his son. And so he explained to Paco that, "You are my son, and I didn't even recognize you." and they went down the beanstalk together, chopped the beanstalk down, that way no one would ever become a nasty giant ever again. And then they lived happily ever after as one big happy family with Paco, his mom, and his father. So for this assignment, I thought that I would want my students to compare and contrast the characters in each of the books. I want them to compare and contrast how they looked, what they did, and how they defeated the giant in the end, and how they acted throughout the stories, and what the character did that was different in each story. And I want them to do this by just a few different activities. One day we can compare and contrast in Venn diagrams, and they can, I'll have a cutout option for them, and they can cut out each character's things that they did. For example, in Paco, the activity that the children would cut out would be that this character, his father was the giant in the story, and then they would put it under Paco's thing. And then in both of these stories, they cut the beanstalk down, which would be in Kate and the Beanstalk and Paco and the Beanstalk. So then that would be in the both column. And then another good way I thought of doing was, I remember at the beginning of this semester, we did a little graphic organizer, and we had to draw the characters, and I thought that would be a super fun way for each kid to express their creativeness. So I could do this for the Giants, which would be super fun to see all the kids' creative side to the Giants, and then they could kind of make their own if they wanted to, but still telling what happened in the story, and then they would make one for each story, and then compare and contrast them, and then we could do a class discussion as well, or a group discussion. Well, I thought those creative drawings was definitely a good idea, because that would make it a little bit more different than just having them write on a Venn diagram, just one by one. Also for this assignment, just another story element that I want them to learn about is the plot of the story. So for this assignment, I thought it'd be a fun idea to compare the plots of all three stories by making cards, just of the summary of the beginning of the story, the middle of the story, and the end of the story. Even though some of these stories are kind of similar, I would make them distinct on details from each specific story. That way the students would be able to have just an easier time putting them in the right story and in the right order. So I would make 3 different cards for one story, beginning, middle, end, and then I'd make a total of 9 cards, shuffle them all together, and divide my students up into groups. And so I'd have one set of 9 cards for each group, and they would have to figure out what order the cards went in, and then what stories each card goes with. So I just thought that was a fun way to get kids interacting with each other, just getting away from that paper assignment. So that's kind of what I was going with for my creative element. It gets kids up and talking, interactive with their peers, and just a fun way to test their learning. So yeah. The grade I was hoping to complete these activities with would hopefully be 3rd graders, and I want to aim for the standard ELA Literacy RL 3.9, and it's just comparing and contrasting the themes, settings, plots, and just the characters of stories written by the same author, or that have similar characters in them. So that would be for an example of Jack and the Beanstalk, how they have the same characters. So yeah. Okay, now I'm on my 5th step of presenting one of my lessons to my pretend students. Okay, kids, after I read those 3 stories to you, now I'm going to divide you up into groups, and I'm going to give you 9 cards, and you need to figure out which 3 cards go to the first story, which 3 cards go to the second story, and which 3 cards need to go to the third story. And between these 3 cards, you need to figure out which card needs to go at the beginning, which card needs to go in the middle, and which card needs to go at the end of the story. And these cards are going to be based off of what happened at the beginning of the story, the middle of the story, and the end of the story, okay? Can we do that? Okay, I will be here if you need any help. Go ahead and get started. Okay, I just wanted to show you an example of just the cards I have. I just did 3 of them because I did not want to write out all 9 cards since they're just probably going to go in the trash in a little bit. So for the first story of Kate and the Beanstalk, for the student's beginning card, I said Kate traded her cow for magic beans, and the beanstalk grew outside of her house. I gave them the little hint that it was Kate because all 3 of the stories started out about the same way. So this was my one hint for them, and that's what I'm gonna kind of do in each one of the cards. That way they won't get too confused because these stories are somewhat similar. So in the second card, in the middle of the story, I said, then the character climbed the beanstalk and helped cook for the giant. And then she took a bag of money and disguised theirself to take money from the giant. So Kate was the only one that helped cook for the giant, and she also disguised herself and went up the beanstalk multiple times. So that's another little hint card for them to tell that it went to Kate's story. And then at the end, for the last card, I said the giant caught this person and this person ran down the beanstalk and chopped it down, and then this person took over to live in the castle, and Kate was the only one that did that once again. So for my Paco 3 cards, I'll probably do something as of the lines of this person traded their cow for magic beans and planted the beans himself, because again, Paco was the only one that planted the beans himself. For the middle, I will say that they were caught by the giant, and then the giant started crying. And then for the end card, I'll say this person, or in this story, the main character figured out that the giant was their father, and then they climbed down the beanstalk, chopped it down, and lived happily ever after. So that was my lesson. Thank you guys so much for listening. I hope you like it.